All right, just gotta give it a second as we get the other Facebook channels in here and connected. And looks like we are good. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, I guess, depending on when you're listening to this. And welcome to the Dove Valley Deep Divers. I am your host for the night, Erick Trickel. Normally the co-host, Lance Anderson, taking the night off as he's doing this weird thing like getting married tomorrow or something like that. But joined today by Coach Luc Polglaze, who's we're gonna be talking about. We kind of dipped into it a little bit when you were on just a couple weeks ago of Nick Benito, but we're gonna be talking about the first four of the Broncos draft picks and going through all that, the wonderful gushiness, get a coach's perspective. But before we get into that, Luke, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back on. Shout out to Lance doing the good thing, getting hitched. Gotta throw this out there as a D3 football coach. I'm repping my Belly of the Beast shirt here right here. So good to be back, man. Appreciate you having me back 2 times in a year. You're gonna get tired of me one of these days. I'm just letting you know now.
I think this ties the current record right now, so we got to get one more at least to break the record, and then we could probably go a couple years without having you on.
as long as you accumulate enough appearances, like you just be careful what you wish for. It's like Beetlejuice. If you say my name too many times, I'm just gonna pop back in when you least expect it.
All right, so before we jump into this, we got some matters of business to clean up. As always, this is the Dove Valley Deep Divers. You can find Coach Luc Polglaze and myself on Twitter. For me, at Erick Trickel with the EL there at the end, and then at Luc Polglaze there you can see on your screen. You can also find the Dove Valley Deep Divers pod at DVDD_pod. That is where you get you can get all the links and catch up on all the latest stuff involving Dove Valley Deep Divers. You can also follow the mothership account at Mile High Huddle. That's where you get access to every single show, all the written content, basically everything that we do with Mile High Huddle. And if you want to go and get some awesome clothing or a cup or anything else, you can go to huddleuppod.com. That's the merch store. You can go get your swag on and just get all sorts of stuff. They make great gifts. My wife has a Dove Valley Deep Diver shirt. Unfortunately, I don't have anything else of any of the shows, and I got to fix that, but we'll get that around. I'll get around to that eventually. So if you guys can, it's always appreciated for your guys' support through the merch store. And then, of course, you can follow the Mile High Huddle pod on Facebook at facebook.com/Mile High Huddle pod. And make sure you guys go to Apple Podcasts and leave your Huddle Up reviews for all the Huddle Up podcasts. And you guys get a chance to win some swag each month. Now, want to say welcome to everybody here in the chat. We have Ernie May saying hello, DVD. Go Broncos. We have Mike S saying what's up, Broncos country, and Greg Smith, good evening, Broncos country. Of course, we have Dylan Von Arx in the chat. And this is going to be a fun one. It's going to be a good and interesting show. It's always nice to get a different perspective on players the Broncos draft. As everybody in the chat knows, if you guys were tuned into us live or even since then, some of us, myself, Nick, Lance, we aren't exactly super high on the class overall, but I know that having discussed some things with Luke behind the scenes, he has a little bit of a different opinion. So it's going to be interesting to hear what they are and be able to tell him why he's wrong. So getting into this, Luke, obviously the first one, we talked about him a little bit last week. He was the first pick for the Broncos, number 64 overall, a guy who I had some concerns about as a run defender. But you there's some ways that you can overcome those issues with him. But the biggest thing is, and I've said this before, I've kind of come around to the pick because with the 64th overall pick, you're going to have issues with a player, no matter what they are. So go ahead and give us your thoughts on Nick Benito.
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, I think this is something that's very apparent to me after kind of getting out of the media analysis world and, being in college coaching for 5 years is I think that coaches and scouts see things from a very different perspective. And I think that would make actually a really interesting topic for someone much, much smarter than I to dive into at some point. But, I think coaches tend to see players and say, oh yeah, I look at this guy. I love what he can do. I love all the intangibles. I love the athleticism. And I can see all the ways that I would want to use this guy. Whereas I think a lot of the time scouts and analysts look at a player and say, I'm not sure about this. I'm not sure about that. Like, not to say that one is a glass half full, one is a glass half empty, but when you get a coach, like at the end of the day, if you show me a guy who can run a 4.3 40 and can jump out of a freaking stadium, then I, as a coach, say, look, I got to get my hands on this guy. I got to be able to maximize this guy. And I think when it comes to Benito, sorry, you want to jump in on that and tell me I'm wrong?
No, I was actually going to say is that you actually do raise an interesting point, and this is something that I've talked about a few times, is being on the outside when I have no clue how they really plan on using Benito. I can look at what they're expected to do because it is a new defensive coordinator coming in. I can look from the outside in and try to make my educated guesses, educated assumptions as to how they're going to use him, but I don't have a clear idea of how that's going to be until he hits the field. And it could be something that is way different, a way to help minimize these concerns that I see, because all I have to go off of is what's there on tape. So that's actually a good point that you make there about not just the coaches and the scouts, but the media as well, those on the outside in, and how they can evaluate the players.
Yeah, and I almost think with Benito, it's a case of me kind of seeing what I see and working backwards with it. Like when I look at Benito, first and foremost, I think his best trait is his athleticism. I think he's a very athletic prospect, and I think that puts him in a good position. But kind of like what we talked about last time in terms of how I don't think he can survive if he's asked to play as a 5-tech, if he's asked to match up consistently on tackles one-on-one, and how kind of playing that 3-down messes with an offensive line with their angles. I kind of see him as a prospect who really, I don't know that he can survive in a 4-down world long-term in the NFL unless he had some real size, unless he had some power. I just don't know if I see that for him. I think he's going to struggle to win one-on-one consistently. So what does that mean? I think that means the Broncos kind of see him being more than likely kind of a 3-down stand-up guy, right? Where he's going to be outside of an end, where that's going to improve his angles. It's going to improve how he takes on a block. So for me, when I look at that draft pick, I almost reverse engineer it and say, I don't know what kind of scheme they're going to run at the end of the day, but I don't think they see this guy as being a 4-down end. I don't think he's going to be able to live in that world. Now, again, that doesn't mean that they aren't going to run 4-down, because Von Miller was, kind of that tweener coming out of college where he wasn't necessarily a true 4-down end. Guess what? The Broncos kind of ran that 4-3 under, where they still asked him to do stand-up linebacker type things from a nominally 4-down front where he's not really an end. So, there are different ways to kind of play with things. But again, a Benito type, and, happy to kind of talk more about him in depth. But for me, just with his athleticism and his skill set right off the bat, that's something that just looks like to me like, nah, he's probably not a great fit for a 4-down scheme.
Yeah, and we'll come right back to that real quick. Just got to say hello to Chase. He's saying, Lance, you look different today. Yeah, unfortunately for him, he's getting married tomorrow, and I kind of made it so he didn't have the choice. I told him, it's like, look, you're getting married on the 28th. You're not appearing on the show on the 27th. He has family and everything, and you know what? Spending time with them, especially in this day and age, far more important. And Travis Weber came in with some stars. Thank you, Travis. We appreciate your support and your consistent support throughout all the shows, every single day, every single week. We appreciate it. But with Nick Benito talking about the 3-down, 4-down, that's how many down defensive linemen, 3-4-4-3. That's what we're talking about there. Basically, the biggest thing is that you're right. He's not going to be a guy who's going to put his hand in the dirt. He's not going to be that 4-3 end. He's going to be a stand-up, basically 7 technique pass rusher, rushing out of that 2-point stance. They're going to probably line him up, obviously, up on the outside of whoever the 4-5 technique is, Draymond Jones, or whoever ends up winning the job on the other side of it, and doing things to help eat up a little bit space and help keep him using where he can use his speed, his bend, his athleticism to get around the corner of the tackles and get after the quarterback. Because if I remember correctly, as you said, he doesn't really have the strength or the power to go through them. And that is something that I saw when I was watching him. He can't go through offensive linemen, but he can go around them. And that leads to another aspect of this, that there's going to be, and we're going to see it, it's becoming a more and more, it's getting bigger in the NFL, getting bigger throughout every level. And that's what? Schemed pressures, that's the term, right? Yeah.
Simulated pressures?
Simulated pressures. That's the term. Thank you. I've had it at the tip of my tongue and then completely space it there at the end. But simulated pressures, I mean, that's going to be something big for the Broncos, and it's just becoming a bigger thing in the NFL. And that is something that Nick Benito can help with. I mean, just dude's a freak athlete. That's never been or not, I wouldn't say freak athlete. He's rather athletic. He's rather bendy, and that's never been a concern of mine. It's just always been his strength and ability to hold up against the run. So with the issues against the run, we talked about this briefly. I don't think we got to it in the show, but we talked about it before the show about certain aspects with his run defense that I wouldn't say, how would the right term be? That you think that he can be fine there, not a complete liability. So why don't we go ahead and get into that to try to ease some of the concerns, because I know a lot of chat wasn't super high on Benito either.
Yeah, I think kind of the big thing with him is you're gambling on that athleticism, and I've been out of the scouting world for a little while, but the one term that kind of translates between both worlds is speed to power, right? You talk about a rusher having the ability to translate speed to power. To be honest, like Benito's first step is electric. Like he routinely is across the line of scrimmage when other guys are getting out of their stances. And that is a special trait. Not only to have the athleticism and the quick twitch to be able to react and get across the line of scrimmage that fast, but also to get into the flow of the game in a way where he is in tune with the cadence, in tune with the snap count. Because believe me, that is not easy to do. Most people are going to say, the defensive linemen are looking at the ball. A lot of the time, it is in their peripheral vision, and they're reacting to the movement of the guy across from them because the offensive line knows the snap count. Now, in the NFL, I'll be honest, a lot of those guys just guess, and you'll see guys kind of jump off sides because they're just trying to get after the quarterback. Snap counts are kind of an open secret a lot of the time in the NFL as well. So, with that, I think that athleticism is something that's going to serve him well. And he has the ability to get off the ball fast and to use that speed, but he just doesn't convert it to power when he's rushing the quarterback. Like you said, he's able to kind of go around offensive tackles. He's able to bend and kind of hit the edge on them, but I just don't see him being able to convert that back into power. Now, to that end, is he going to struggle against the run if he's in a 4-down defense where he has to play one-on-one versus a tackle? Yeah, absolutely. He doesn't have that kind of skill set. I think zone type a zone scheme from the offense, whether it's inside zone or outside zone, that's going to give him some issues because, it's asking him to play one-on-one against a tackle and play against the run. Now, again, like we kind of talked about last time, like for him being that force player or contain player, he has to keep his outside arm free. If he can do that, if he can stay at the line of scrimmage and do that, he's going to be in good shape. If he has his outside arm free, but he's 5 yards off the line of scrimmage, that's a bad deal, right? So in a 3-down world, you can improve those blocking angles with a 4 or 4-eye inside of him, making it harder for the tackle to climb to him. Realistically, one of the things that I noticed about him with that first step and kind of where it actually really helped him in the run game was counter, because you get a guard pulling at him. All of a sudden, that guard who's pulling flat to kick out the end man on the line of scrimmage, he's going to go and try and kick Benito out as tight as he can. Now, all of a sudden, Benito's first step has taken him deeper into the backfield than that guard is normally used to. Now the guard has to adjust and go out and find him there. And now that leaves a hole for the offense because now there's a lot more space there, right? Now that's a good thing and a bad thing. Like on a counter play, that can gash you because you've got a second puller coming through. But if the defense knows that and they're able to adjust, now you've basically got a lot more space for guys to flow to the ball and make the play.
Yeah, real quick, Travis Silver came in with some stars saying, "Good evening, Eric. Welcome, Luke, again, and hello, Broncos country. I feel the defensive lineman, I can't spell his name for the life of me, Eyioma Uwazurike, will make an immediate impact of the rookies, followed by Benito, depending on how healthy Gregory and Chubb is." Now, with Uwazurike, I mean, I can say it, but I can't spell it. I actually have to Google it and make sure that I'm trying to spell it right every time I write it up. I just can't get the spelling down correctly every single time just yet. So I feel you on that one. As for making an immediate impact, as I said when he's drafted him, and as I said multiple times, I think that there is a clear opening for a very certain role that the Rams used last year with Ashawn Robinson, and Uwazurike is the one who fits that the cleanest. Everybody's pointing to McTelvin Najim, but McTelvin Najim has so many issues against the run that if he doesn't take this gigantic leap forward as a run defender, he just doesn't fit that role, because that role is you're eating up as much space as possible, still being able to push the pocket against the pass, and allowing your edges and your linebacker to go ahead and make the play, hit the hole, meet the ball carrier. And so Uwazurike, 6'6", 315 pounds, I think he was at the combine. I mean, he's got size, he's got length. Pad level could be a little bit of an issue, and we're definitely going to talk about Uwazurike here more in a little bit. But but just some quick thoughts about him, about if he can make an immediate impact.
Uwazurike, you're saying?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into him in more depth for sure, because I have more thoughts on just like than an immediate impact. Immediate impact. I don't know. I think that's kind of an in between thing for me, because I think he's got the skill set to make an immediate impact as a run defender. Do I think he's going to be a twitchy pass rusher who's going to jump off the screen? No, I don't think he's going to be a flashy guy, but I think he's going to be a guy who can come in and be a part of a D-line rotation, execute his role. Do I think he's going to be a guy who comes out of nowhere and takes the league by storm and is, chasing JJ Watt for sack totals every year? No, but I do think he can make an immediate impact. I just don't know if it's going to always be in the public eye and in the way that people see it. I think he's going to be kind of one of those unsung heroes who, if you ask the linebackers who they were going to, buy a coffee for every week, they'd probably say a guy like him because he makes their job easier. But I don't know that he's going to get the plaudits in the media per se.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of similar there for like Derek Wolfe for a while. I mean, Derek Wolfe wasn't always the flashiest player, but he did his job. He was consistent. He was disciplined. And, well, I don't think Uwazurike will be – I mean, Wolfe was a very talented player in his own right. Uwazurike is just going to be that disciplined guy that just goes out there, does his role, and his impact won't always show in the box score. Jeffrey comes in and says, "Glad you're feeling better, Eric. Go Broncos." Thank you. I last week just happened to get a little overheated, and just led to some other issues. And honestly, it scared the living crap out of me. So I've been starting a diet and workout and everything. But thank you for that. But I'm feeling fine. I started feeling fine last week after I cooled down and everything. So no issues. Nothing seems to be a lingering issue either. When saw somebody to help with that. And then Mike S says, which of the top 4 picks do you like the least, Luke?
Oh man, really put me on the spot. I mean, as a coach, the easy answer for me here is like, I don't think any of them is particularly bad. Like, they're all football players, and if they're used in a wrong way or if they're not developed correctly, then they're going to be bad. Which I know is such a cop-out answer as a coach. I would say the pick I think I'll put it this way. I think the pick who has the most specific niche that like they need in order for them to contribute is probably Benito. Like, I think he can do so much for you from an athleticism perspective. And honestly, I think the thing that he does that most people don't ask of a 4-down end in college is he drops into coverage. Like, Oklahoma asked him to do that. Like, that is such, their defensive coordinator, Alex Grinch, like, is a very hot commodity name in coaching because he's very highly thought of. Like, Benito was kind of a jack of all trades. Now, like, he was played as the defensive end into the boundary, and that is for a very specific reason, because you can drop that guy into coverage more easily than you can the defensive end to the field, because you're dropping him into the boundary. There's far less space there. So you can drop that guy to the curl flat window. That's less distance for him to travel. He has to react to less route combinations because you can't run as many different things into the boundary. So those are things he can do in the NFL, right? He can, there's no real field and boundary because the hash marks are so tight, but you can do that. When they went to their 3-down package, he kind of was a stand-up linebacker over the center. He can move laterally. He can spy the quarterback. He can do that in the NFL. The other thing Oklahoma did was they would stunt, they would twist him inside, not always to, he wouldn't necessarily win one-on-one with guards. Like, he just doesn't have that power, but sometimes they miscommunicate. He comes through free, or the guy outside of him wins against a tackle. So he has the versatility. I just don't know that I see him being necessarily a day one impact player. I just don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, just because of that, he's a bad player. I think he needs a specific role, and I think he's going to have to grow into that role. I think he's going to be very much a designated pass rusher, probably his first year or so in the league, as he adds strength, as he adds power and understanding of the NFL and game speed there. I think he's going to be a good dynamic player. I just don't think he's going to be like an every down guy, because I think there's so much you can do with him. Again, from a coach's perspective, a college coach loves that guy because he can do so much for you.
Yeah, and there's something you said there that I want to come back to, but first, Chad, the big boss man, came in with a $20 donation. Thank you, Chad, for, just everything, the opportunity that you've given me and all that through all those years ago and what it's kind of evolved into. He says, shout out to an MHH alum. Luke was part of the team that founded Mile High Huddle back in 2014. Gang's all here. last time you were on, I made the comment that I didn't think that you were part of it at the beginning, and after we got off, you kind of scolded me about it and how you were actually part of you were the part of the process of coming up with the name Mile High Huddle. Yeah, I mean, it's just great. And I mean, it was so many years ago that I don't fully remember everything. Honestly, I couldn't even tell you when MHH was founded. So 2014, I got to commit that to memory. But yeah, Luke, it's always great to have you on, and it's great to have met you and everything. And yeah, super excited to hear and get a coach's perspective on these players.
Yeah, just glad we could get the record straight here for once, Eric. No, I'm kidding. No, from memory, if you're really looking for dates, I think it would be. I remember talking to Chad in probably July or August of 2014, if memory serves. So you can fact check me on that. But no, I was thankful for the opportunity to be a part of that. Like I love my time in the journalism and the media world, and got the opportunity to coach, and have kind of taken that by the horns and just kind of run with it. And it's been amazing, and there are definitely days when I miss getting to talk football from a scouting perspective. But I'm also thankful for the life I get to lead as a college football coach as well.
Well, at least I'm still here to help you dip your toes into the water on the media aspect of it. Anyway,
depending on the day, that water is either freezing cold or scalding hot, depending on how you're doing.
That is true. And then Orange Colored Glasses rule came real quick, came in and said, "Is it me or do the highlights of Henningsen not remind you of Derek Wolfe?" Matt Henningsen is an interesting player. I mean, there's no denying how intelligent of a player he is. I mean, there's a reason he's compared to Matt Damon's character in A Beautiful Mind. The academics there are amazing for him. I mean, some rather prestigious awards and stuff like that, if I remember correctly, during his time in college. And he is a really good football player. He was one of the guys when they announced the list for the scouting combine this year. He was one of the guys that I immediately didn't see on there. I was like, that's a mistake. He should definitely be on that. He pops consistently on tape. The Wisconsin game versus Notre Dame was just really speaks to how good of a player he could potentially be. I think that this is a guy, and I don't say this often with guys drafted in the 6th, 7th round. He's a guy that he can become a long-term starter in the NFL. He just has that talent. He's not a bad athlete. He's got the intelligence. And at the very least, this is a guy that I think that he hangs around as long as he stays healthy. He's already dealt with an injury. He dealt with some injuries in college. So that's a big caveat here. That he can have a long career in the NFL. Inversely, speaking of that Notre Dame game, that was an extremely bad game from Faion Hicks, the Wisconsin defensive back that was a rather concerning. He got burned multiple times, got out of position a couple times, so it was a little bit rough. But hopefully, Faion Hicks at least can beat out Asong Bossy for that backup nickel corner spot. But Henningsen reminded me of Derek Wolfe. I could definitely see it. I could definitely see why that comparison is there. They have similar play styles. Henningsen is another one of those guys. He's disciplined, which later on at some point I'll definitely get into the whole aspect with discipline with his coaching staff. It seems to be a pretty important thing for them. But so yeah, I definitely see it. Going back to Nick Benito and talking about what all he can do. How familiar are you with Leonard Floyd?
I'm a little bit familiar. Yeah, I know the guy. Not personally, but I know of Leonard Floyd, yes.
And of his role in the NFL as it's been kind of this hybrid guy drops into coverage a little bit. And basically one of the things that I heard consistently throughout the draft process was that's your role for Nick Benito. Guy who can drop into coverage. You got to cover him up as a run defender a little bit. But he's athletic, he's explosive, he's bendy. Those traits were described as with Leonard Floyd as well. So that could be that role for Nick Benito, kind of
100%. And I think, not to be pop psychologist here, I think probably people might be a little bit down on him because he is, he was the Broncos' first draft choice this year. And, when you wait as long as 64, there's bound to be some some discontent with, we got this far just to get a guy who's going to be a pass rusher for the first couple of years. And like, that's totally understandable. Like you're going to want bang for your buck, but at the same time, I think he's good. Like he's drafted about where I would expect him to be. He's a player with great upside. He's a player who is not a perfect day one starter. He's a day one impact player in certain sub packages, in ways where you can scheme him up to not have to play tackles one-on-one in the run game, and where you can scheme him up ways to get, good advantageous pass rush looks. And guess what? He keeps that athleticism. He adds some size. He adds some power. 2 years from now, he's a 3-down player for you. But right now, maybe he's an impact guy. He comes in a couple sub packages. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he's listed at second on the depth chart, and if anything happens to the 1, the 3 jumps him. Like, that would not shock me for this year, because I think they're going to see him as a designated pass rusher. I say that fully acknowledging that I have no idea who they're going to consider 1, 2, or 3 on the depth chart as, but he just strikes me as someone they're going to see as, this guy is a part-time player for us in base packages, but he's going to be an impact guy for us on third and long situations where we can tell him, Nick, go get the quarterback.
Yeah, and on that is, Bradley Chubb, Randy Gregory, being able to take that time with Nick Benito, having Chubb and Gregory there on the roster. Those are your 2 starters, provided they stay healthy. Both of them have, rather severe injury history. They can give Nick Benito the time. They can use him as that pass rusher. And the biggest thing is they're also moving Baron Browning. And I know a lot of Broncos country isn't happy with that. He's going to be this hybrid off-ball edge player for them. And he can step in and he can help provide that time to him. The biggest thing, and one of the biggest reasons why I like this pick, is it helps keep Malik Reed off the field. And that was the biggest concern. If you want to talk about a liability against the run, just watch Malik Reed. And I believe it was the Philadelphia game where the offensive lineman just shoved him back 20 yards, almost matching step for step with the running back. It was absolutely abysmal showing from him against the run. But go ahead.
I was going to say, I will jump in. Like, this is not me saying, like, I don't know Randy Gregory and Bradley Chubb are the ones. Like, it's just going to depend, like, in each package, like, who is the one for them at that specific position. Yeah. Like, I think he's going to be a 1 on their obvious pass rushing package from day one. Like, especially with Chubb, especially with Gregory, those are guys you can kick inside on a 3rd and long situation, where now you can get good matchups with those guys against guards, because those guys are more likely to win pass rush reps against guards. Now you can isolate a Benito on a tackle and let him go to work in space.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason you touched on it a little bit about hitting the pick, because it was the first pick, 64th overall. Obviously you're going to find a player there with issues, but I think one of the biggest things is Broncos country. A lot of us were set on offensive tackle, and there was a lot of fans that were set on an offensive tackle out of Washington State, Abraham Lucas, who he ended up going 80, 81, somewhere around there, and he was on the board, and Denver passed on the tackle. There was a defensive lineman out of Connecticut that I myself had as a 1st-round pick that fell to the 3rd round. So he was there at 64, and everybody wanted him in Travis Jones. Big athletic dude. Just right behind Jordan Davis with the athletic testing at the combine. It was absolutely insane. But when you don't always hear stuff before the draft, sometimes and then you start to hear it afterwards. And I guess there was a lot of conditioning questions with Travis Jones, and a lot of lack of discipline concerns with Travis Jones. So Abraham Lucas, he kind of went in the range that was expected for him. But with Travis Jones, I kind of mentioned it earlier about discipline being important with his coaching staff. And this is one where, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and most coaches would want this, is you got to do your role, because if you don't, then you're just hurting the whole unit. And this is a big thing with this coaching staff, with the things that they're going to do on the defense. You can't freelance. You got to do your job, and you got to do it well. And Travis Jones, when he does his job well, there was noticeable times that he was freelancing, and that with the conditioning aspect could have been why Denver decided to pass on him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so key too, is, so much of defense is relying on the guys around you to do their 111th. You'll hear that expression, like Bill Belichick and his whole do your job mantra. Like, you won't walk into a football coach's office across America and not hear them say, like, do your job. And yeah, to Tommy's comment, like, space is bad. I think space can be good or bad for both the offense or the defense, right? And I think space is not necessarily a bad thing for a defense if it's a schemed space, right? When a defense takes on, say it's a puller, right? If they have a pulling guard coming to them, they know within the concept of the defense how they should take on the puller, right? Do they box him, and do they basically get their outside shoulder free and, knock everything back inside of them? Or do they spill it, take away the puller's inside shoulder, and now they knock everything and spill it wider than them? So realistically, space can be bad, but if you're scheming space, if you're telling the entire defense, hey, we're going to spill this, now this becomes a predictable angle for everybody else, because they know that the defensive end is going to spill the puller. Now they know where the running back is going to have to bounce the run, right? Because if the running back sees the puller lose his block from his perspective, right, now he has to trace that ball outside. Now it's a race to the sideline. So space can and cannot be bad, right? Like if that defensive end is if he's going to let himself get kicked out, if he's creating that space, it's because he knows he's going to have someone filling that space behind him. You have like incredibly, not necessarily complex, but very detailed eye progressions, even for safeties these days, when they're playing out in space and they're reading how an overhang is getting blocked in terms of how they're going to fit off of that. Space is not necessarily bad. Unfilled space is bad. But space in and of itself can actually be a very good thing for a defense if it's predictable, if it's, again, if the guy does his job right and the space is, if they're forcing the run where it needs to be, then that can actually be a really good thing.
Yeah, and we spent 30 minutes here, so time to move on to the next player. And of course, this is actually a perfect comment to kind of transition us into it from Travis Weber saying, I know we will see how Hackett's system work, but with Wilson's history of not using the tight end much, what kind of impact will Dulcich make? So before we actually get into the question itself, why don't you give us some quick thoughts on Dulcich?
Yeah, for being in a Chip Kelly offense, which, historically has the kind of the stereotype of air raid, throw the ball around. Like, I think that Dulcich actually did a lot of stuff pretty reasonably well in both the run and the pass game. From what I saw of him, I don't think he does great against like press, like tight coverage, which kind of is to be expected. That's fair. He's a tight end. He's a bigger body, but I do think he's actually really pretty agile and pretty good at kind of escaping coverage at the second level. Like one thing you talk about is first level releases, right? Which is pretty obvious. You've got a man right up in your face. Like you've got a defensive back who's going to challenge you off the line of scrimmage. You're going to get that on the outside receivers, right? Like outside receivers have to win against press coverage. Like that is just a default of playing in the NFL. Second level releases are when you're now going to release, and say you're a tight end and you're running a dig, right? So you're trying to break to the inside of the field. Now you've got a linebacker coming out, and he's told his coaching point is wall 3, right? He has got to wall number 3. He cannot let number 3 get to the middle of the field. So now you've got kind of the unstoppable force and the immovable object, right? You've got the tight end who needs to get to the middle of the field, and you've got the linebacker who's not going to let him get to the middle of the field. So how do you work those second level releases? How do you create space for yourself? And I think he's actually really athletic. I think he does a good job with his hips. I think he does a good job with his hands. Obviously UCLA did a lot with him in terms of splitting him out wide and putting him in a receiver position. And I don't think they actually lost anything from him in terms of contributions by doing that. Like they asked a lot of things of him that they would a receiver. I don't think they changed their playbook with him at receiver, which is a testament to his talent as a receiver. Obviously he wasn't asked to do a ton from a true 3-point stance in line as a tight end. I thought from what I saw, I liked what I saw. I'd kind of like to see him refit his hands and drive a little bit sooner. But I think his hand placement in particular is really, really good. And that can be difficult for tight ends to kind of get right.
Yeah. So going back to Travis's question here, what kind of impact he'll make with Wilson's history of not using tight end much? Russell Wilson historically, he hasn't used the tight end that well. Tight end targets under Russell Wilson, with Russell Wilson leading the helm of the Seattle Seahawks, they have consistently been in like the bottom 3 every single year in tight end targets. Just not used much and not targeted often. Doesn't mean that they don't make plays, and they definitely go out there. They make plays. Will Dissly made some nice plays, as Chase says. Made some nice deep plays with Russ. He did against the Broncos too, if I remember correctly, that he had a couple of them a couple years ago. So it's not that he he uses them. It's just not a high rate of usage compared. I mean, it's below the league average. And part of the concern here too is obviously how much of that was the offensive system in Seattle. But if that's going to be a concern, this needs to be a similar concern with Nathaniel Hackett, who said that he's bringing over a lot of the Green Bay offense and really wanted to attack the boundaries. Aaron Rodgers, ever since LaFleur and Hackett have got to Green Bay, is also there towards the bottom in usage of the tight end and tight end targets. But there's more ways that a tight end like Dulcich can help out the offense besides just being targeted. So, Luke, I mean, you could probably explain that a lot better than I can.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really interesting to me, and this is just kind of a casual observation, like I'd be curious to get, Eric, your thoughts, since I know you watch a lot more like high-level Division I college football than I do. I tend to watch the upcoming opponents, and that's about it. But a lot of the time, so when a team lines up in 11 personnel, that's 3 receivers, 1 tight end, 1 running back, and they line up in kind of a 4-wide 3-by-1 split, right? So they've got 3 receivers to one side of the field, they've got 1 receiver to the other, and they put the tight end to the trip side. I feel like the majority of the time, what I kind of see as standard is to put the tight end at number 2, right? So from the inside out, you've got receiver, tight end, outside receiver. I feel like that's kind of typically what I've seen. And that's from a coaching perspective for a pretty straightforward reason, right? If you're going to throw a screen to the receiver, the 2 easiest screens are to throw for a quarterback is number 3 on a bubble and number 1 on a tunnel, right? Those are the 2 easiest throws because they're the shortest distance and they're the easiest throws. Now, what UCLA did with Dulcich, which was really interesting, is they put him at number 3. Sure, you could throw a tight end a bubble, but that's not really going to be kind of his wheelhouse per se, right? You're not going to ask that guy to turn around and backpedal and then catch a ball and get upfield. That's just not his deal. But by doing that, they actually kind of force defenses to adjust in a way, because that is not the standard way of doing it. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. That just doesn't feel like kind of what I've seen as being standard. So for what they asked him to do in the pass game, they kind of put him in a position where now he can be kind of that interior most receiver where he's going to get good matchups. And they force defenses, because offenses typically line up in that very predictable way. Now the defense has to kind of change their thought process of how do they attack this, or how do they defend this formation when they're so used to defending screen-wise the bubble of 3 and the tunnel of 1. So now you put a tight end there, that kind of changes the equation for defense, and that actually creates some really good mismatches for Dulcich, right? Because now it puts him in a position where the defense has to adjust slightly. They're not going to change their entire thought process, but they're going to do some things differently. And I think he did a really good job of taking advantage of that as a receiver in a 2-point stance. I think in particular, he ran digs really well. I was really impressed with that. But I do think from a 3-point stance, his blocking was good enough that I think he can get by there. But again, for me, from what I see from him, again, based on film and athleticism, really excited to see what he might be able to do out of a 2-point receiver stance.
Yeah, Gary Lee's Palmer came in saying, "Good afternoon, Eric, and welcome back, Luke. Always great to get your take." And yeah, it's always great to get Luke's take, even when he's wrong. And I mean, one of those instances is with Dulcich's blocking, but we'll get that here in a second. Andrew Baker says, "Some love for Valley Boys and Scott. And great to see you're okay, Eric. Let's ride." Yeah, as I said earlier, I mean, I'm feeling fine, feeling great. Last week, it's just a matter of just getting a little too hot and just needed to go and cool down a little bit. So thank you guys. And I saw you guys' kind words and everything last week as well, and I appreciate that. But everything's all good on my end. Just starting to get hot in Alaska, and my office gets quite hot when that happens, and just didn't have it cooled down enough, before going live, and adding in extra lighting on me made it even hotter. But going back to how you're wrong about Greg Dulcich's blocking, to be honest here, it's not super terrible. I mean, one thing I absolutely loved about his blocking, and it's something that you always love to hear, is his effort. I mean, there's no doubt that he was giving it 100, 110% every single time he was asked to block. I mean, there's times, and Bronco fans should be familiar with this, you see a tight end go out there, he's asked to block, and you can see that the effort just isn't all there. Certain number 87 from last year, kind of gives that away. But the other thing, too, with Greg Dulcich that I absolutely love to hear was how willing he was to do it and how he strives to consistently get better. It's never enough. He's always got to get better, and he has that drive and effort, and I absolutely love to hear that about a tight end, especially when they have an area where not necessarily a major weakness, but a clear area of improvement that they need to make.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but he's a former walk-on, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, and to me that's awesome. Like he that means he worked hard enough. He earned his spot. He earned everything he's got. Like, going from a walk-on to an impact player in college is the same thing as an undrafted free agent making the team in the NFL, right? Because he's had to be hungry, he's had to work hard, and he's had to grind for that. That was not handed to him. Now, don't get me wrong, like, this is not saying that all walk-ons are bad college football players, because believe me, walk-ons are incredibly talented, but they just may not have the same athletic abilities as some of the other guys. So for him, like, I think blocking wise, I think one thing he does really well is he's really strong with his leverage side hand, right? So if I've got a guy right out here and I'm trying to block him and I'm trying to get my hat across, right? I'm trying to get my helmet play side of his to cut him off with my body, right? To put my body between him and the ball carrier. He's really strong with that hand to first throw a blow to kind of throw that guy's shoulder back to be able to then fit his second hand in. And that's crucial, because as a tight end, your first hand has to be your strong one, because that's how you're going to set the tempo on a block. If you're soft with that first hand and then really hard with the second one, guess what? You're actually going to bounce the guy into the lane. Right, you're actually going to end up throwing him with your momentum in the direction that you want the ball to go. So your first hand, your placement's got to be right, because you don't want to be off laterally, but your power has to be really good to shock him, kind of jolt him a little bit, which also gives you time to then bring your second hand and refit your feet and your hands. To drive your feet and refit your hands. And I think that first hand is really good with him. I think where he kind of fails is then kind of refitting his hands, and I think he can be better with his feet and driving from there. But that first hand, I think, is really good with him. And I think that's something that tight ends can struggle with, consistently getting that first hand right. So yeah, if you get that first hand right and then you give effort, you're going to be a good college tight end. But you're going to have to kind of put the full picture together to be a good pro level tight end.
Yeah, one thing in doing this, and I'm not sure if you'll agree with me or not on this, one thing I've learned in doing this, especially when it comes to blocking, is there is so much importance on that first punch, that first connection, and blocking. And often it's what sets up the result of the play. So with Greg Dulcich, just real quick, so we can get on to Demarri Mathis and Uwazurike. What kind of caliber tight end do you think he can be? Like, can he be one of those guys, like, not necessarily like top 5, but being a top 10 tight end, top 15? Where can you see him landing if he reaches his potential?
Oh man, that's a great question. I've seen some clickbait type stuff calling him the next Travis Kelsey. I think Travis Kelsey is kind of a one-of-a-kind player. Like, I don't think there's a ton of Travis Kelce's and Rob Gronkowski's walking the streets these days. They're kind of, they're unique. I think he can be a very, very good tight end. I think he's got the athletic ability. I think he's got the drive and the desire to become very good. And like I said, I think his route running ability is good. Like, he's got good flexibility at the second level. I think one thing he kind of struggles with a little bit, which is kind of a classic tall guy syndrome deal, is what I call airplaning, which is, and you see this with receivers who are not as good at disguising it, but when they're running a route, they look like an airplane taking off, in the sense that the closer they get to their break point, the more they kind of start rising up in their stance, right? You want them to be nice and low with good pad level kind of throughout. That's one thing I think he struggles with. I think, NFL defenders are going to be able to pick up and say, hey, his shoulders are higher than they were 2 steps ago. He's about to change direction, or he's about to stop. So those are things that NFL defenders will pick up on, and those are things he can refine. So I think he can be a very good, easily top half of the league tight end. Do I think he has the athleticism to be an absolute matchup nightmare? Probably not. But, if he really gets his route running down, yeah, sure, he could be a top half of the league tight end.
All right. So before we get into Demarri Mathis, everybody in chat, make sure you guys get your questions in for Luke. This is his final appearance ever on Dove Valley Deep Divers. No. Just with summer, and might be able to squeeze him on one more time before the college football season starts. But, for some weird reason, when college football season starts, a college coach gets busy. But so make sure you guys get your questions in about this. And so Demarri Mathis, this is one that just based off a quick conversation that we had, we seem to have not necessarily, I don't want to say a difference of opinion on him as a player, just a difference of him as in terms of what he can kind of be. So what are your thoughts on Mathis?
Yeah, well, I think for first and foremost, like I think a lot of what he does is going to fit what the Broncos are going to end up doing. Like he played at Pitt. Pitt is the absolute bastion of quarters. Like they run quarters until the cows come home, and I think that's probably something he's going to be asked to do a fair bit in Denver. So I think that's going to serve him well right off the bat. I know a lot of what he ended up doing kind of turned into man at a certain point for him, and I think he's comfortable in man. But from a coaching perspective, I don't know if I'm comfortable with him being in man a lot of the time. One game where I noticed he really struggled was Wake Forest, and Wake Forest, in my opinion, is one of the best offenses in college football at RPOing. And what they ended up doing was they isolated him on a receiver several times, and they threw glances against him. And a glance is just like a 7-step post. So basically, the safety is involved in the run fit, or the safety steps down, and they're trying to fit a ball right in behind where the safety would be on a post to the receiver. And they got him a couple times on that. He ended up getting grabby. I think he had a couple penalties called against him. He got beat on a couple of those. And I don't know that you can live with him full time as a man cover corner. Can you live with him as a zone cover corner? Yeah, I think so. I think he's one thing he brings as a DB, which is unique and refreshing, is tackling. He's not afraid to be physical. He comes up and makes plays. I think, he can be a good press corner. I just don't know that he has the length to really survive as a man press corner long-term in the NFL.
Yeah. And I mean, as you said, cover 4 match quarters, like Pittsburgh's bread and butter. I mean, he knows it. And that's the assumption of what Denver will be running. Travis Wilbur came in with some stars. Thank you, Travis. We appreciate that. And as I said before, your consistent support throughout all this show, every week, every day. It's awesome. You're one of the superstars of Mile High Huddle, and we appreciate you. With Demarri Mathis, there's some, I don't want to say necessarily say debate. One thing that stood out when I watched him was his versatility. I believe that he can do multiple things in the secondary, play multiple roles. I think and you can hear and have your rebuttal here. I think his best role for long term, like if he really wants to, if he wants to be not necessarily a star, but a great player in the NFL, I think the best place for him is actually at safety.
Interesting. Yeah, I think his tackling ability lends itself well to safety. I've seen some people kind of throw around, can he be the nickel corner type deal where, these days in the NFL, having a slot corner like a Chris Harris Jr. of years past, like who can tackle, who can be physical and come down and stop the run is so important. I think one thing I was really, let down by was just kind of seeing what coaches will call a crack replace, which is basically anytime the receiver comes in to block the safety that the corner then needs to trace back outside and now fit the run. That was one thing that I think he was just slow to react to seeing that. So I'd be curious if that kind of translates in him being slower to see things happening in front of him at safety. I don't hate him as a DB by any means. I think he's got a lot of tools that I think coaches will like he's not afraid to be physical. He's not afraid to come down and be physical in coverage or tackle against the run. But I also don't know that he necessarily has like that second gear, like recovery speed that you would maybe necessarily want from a safety either.
Interesting. So Mathis, not much to really cover. It's very obvious why Denver looked his way. One thing that was interesting is that when the Broncos have a series, Luke, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, called Behind the Broncos. I believe is what it's called.
I've seen of it. I haven't actually watched any of it, but I've seen the things floating across my social media.
And in that, one of the things that I found was interesting that it was leading up to pick 64 when they picked Nick Benito is Greg Dulcich was mentioned. Demarri Mathis was mentioned. So I find that interesting that there was at least a conversation there of taking Demarri Mathis at 64 and they got him at 115th overall. And again, it's not hard to see why. I mean, projected scheme that the Broncos are running, coverage scheme, seems to be exactly along the same of what he was doing at Pittsburgh. So not a huge change. I mean, obviously you have the change in certain terminology or certain wording, things like that, but most of it's going to be the same. Phil McLaughlin came in with some stars. We appreciate that, Phil. We appreciate your support. I mean, you guys, without your guys' support, I wouldn't be able to do this full time. And so I'm especially appreciative of it, but I know everybody else here at MHH is as well. Orange Colored Glasses says, do you have any idea on how some of our young veteran late round or undrafted players are developing? Seth Williams, Moody, Cleveland, Jamar Johnson, Sosa. Sosa doesn't sound familiar. Ojemudia and Bossy. Or Bassie. Seth Williams, haven't really heard anything about. One thing that I found was interesting was Netani Moody being talked about with how great he's doing in the outside zone scheme. At this point, could be coach speak, could be reality. It's one of those situations where I'll believe it when I see it, because watching last year, it was something that Moody really struggled with. So I can't imagine that, he's just drastically gotten so much better. Tyree Cleveland, I mean, Dwayne Stukes referred to him as a core special teams player. That may be enough to get him on the practice squad, because when you're looking at that bottom or that low on the depth chart, special teams matters. Jamar Johnson, obviously he still has a chance for it. In my opinion, I think he's been effectively replaced. Delarian Turner-Yell, Kareem Jackson, PJ Locke. PJ Locke especially has been looking really good at camp so far. Made some plays. Justin Simmons praised him. A couple other players praised him. So Jamar Johnson, the biggest issue, again, is special teams. Not very physical, not exactly a great tackler. And that's something that you have to be able to do on special teams, especially as a safety. Sosa is McTelvin Najim. Okay. McTelvin Najim, he did fine as a pass rusher last year. I actually have my player profile on McTelvin Najim that goes in a lot more into my thoughts on him and what he's done and where he's at. He has a chance to be a starter this year, but he's got to show improvement as a run defender. Ojemudia, he played great. I mean, against Kansas City, it was the only game he played in last year. I mean, he played extremely well. Asong Bossy, I think, is at a point where they needed to look at replacing him. It's just, he's shown that he's just not, he can't handle the crossing routes, which if you're going to be in the corner, you got to be able to handle it a little bit better, a lot better than he does. So moving on to Eyioma Uwazurike, Inni, as his nickname is. I know that you've seen my Twitter reaction to it. You know that I was rather excited when that pick came down the pipeline there. We talked about him briefly earlier. 6'6", 315, 16 pounds, extremely long, pretty good athlete for his size. Not exactly the most bursty, speedy guy, but he doesn't really need to be. And so one thing that I will say this, one thing that bothered me a lot during the draft process was people kept referring to him as an edge. And that is largely due to how Iowa State, that defense that Iowa State runs, getting him classified as an edge. But that was rather frustrating because, I mean, if you can't look at a 6'6", 315-pound guy and say, yeah, that's not an edge, I have issues with that. So go ahead and give us your thoughts on Uwazurike.
Just because he plays DN doesn't make him an edge. Like that's the thing about the Iowa State defense, and this is becoming increasingly in vogue. Like I think you're going to see more and more teams doing this, is giving what look like really, really light box counts, but they're playing 3 down and they're having 3 safeties on the field and they're fitting the run with ways that you don't expect it, and it throws off counts for the offense because they won't. If you have a safety coming in to play the run from 10 yards downfield and the safety knows he's playing run, but the offensive line doesn't, then you're not going to account for that guy in your blocking scheme. And so that's why Iowa State is really throwing off some of these college offenses. So when it comes to him, yeah, obviously he's not an edge. Like I would consider him an interior defensive lineman first and foremost. For being 6'6", I think he actually gets off the ball pretty well. I think he actually has pretty good pad level when he makes contact. I think he gets impressively low for a bigger guy. I think he ends up kind of standing up a little bit more the more he makes contact, but I think he fires off the ball well. A lot of the time what you see with these defensive ends, especially in Iowa State 3-down type scheme. And you'll see this from the Iowa States increasingly, like the Baylors of the world, where it's Dave Aranda kind of running similar thought processes. is you'll see them in these 4-point stances. And a lot of the time you'll see them 4-eye or 4 where they're head up on a tackle. And they'll be in a 4-point totally balanced stance, and they play what's called like a launch technique or a jump technique, not like a true jump technique, but like where they're basically firing off the ball and they're making contact with the offensive lineman and they're fitting based on flow, right? So if the offensive lineman goes to his left, depending on what his gap is, he's going to fit to the right. So when he's getting off the ball, people are, a lot of people will say, oh, he's in a 4-point stance. Why is he not in a 3-point stance? Well, if you're in a 4-point stance, it's really easy for you to, number one, fire off straight, but for you to adjust based on that, depending on where the offensive line goes. So I think that's actually a very nuanced technique for him to play. I think that's not an easy technique to play. It's not a true 2-gap. It's kind of like a either or gap type situation. I think this is a guy who is built for a 3-down defense, realistically. I think he can play end for you on base down and distance, and then you can kick him to nose. I think he can be okay as a pass rusher. Like I said, I don't think he's flashy. I don't think he's going to get any kind of sack races league-wide. But I think he can chew up the front of the pocket. I think he can kind of push the center back a little bit. But realistically, this is a guy you can play anywhere across a 3-down front, and he's going to do a great job of, like I said, linebackers are going to be queuing up to buy this guy a coffee because he's going to make their lives a lot easier, I think.
Yeah, and with one of the things you said is being able to play anywhere on the defensive line is, having that versatility. In this day and age in the NFL, the more you can do, the better, the more hats you can wear. One thing you mentioned is that his gap responsibilities was kind of an either or kind of situation. Just how easy do you think that is to transfer to a 1.5 gap technique? Like just for some of those out there, like how easy is it simply to just, all right, 1.5 gap instead of this kind of either or kind of thing?
I mean, I think that the either or is actually a little bit harder. I think it's a little bit more technical because you basically have to, like, in the time between you fire off the ball and the time you make contact, you have to recognize, okay, which way is the offensive line stepping and how does that determine where I fit, right? Like if I am head up on a tackle and he is going to say I'm playing right defensive end against the left tackle, right? Yeah. If he goes to my right, his left, if it's say outside zone, then I need to get into his back pocket and play the B gap, right? I need to be a B gap player. Say it's same exact situation, but now the offensive line is going outside zone to the right. I'm still going to try and launch and disrupt him and slow him down, but now I become a C gap player is one way you can kind of get into that. And that's very, very technical. Like that is not an easy like technique to do. That requires a lot of drilling. So I think that 1.5 gap is actually a little bit easier to do because there's so much less reaction involved in terms of like launching off the ball, getting your feet right. How do you make contact? Where do you fit? Where do you put your hands? Like so much goes into just the way that Iowa State plays their defense, which, has a high learning curve. So I think it's a lot easier once you do that. Like I think you actually have a good nuanced understanding of offensive line play.
Yeah, Chance the Gamer came out with the $5 donation. Said, what do you guys think our record would be if we took this year's team and dropped them in last year's? That's always difficult. That kind of question is difficult to answer just because, so many different variables in play. I think it's safe to assume that they would definitely be better. I mean, there was quite a few close games that they had. And I think that a lot of those, with having a quarterback like Russell Wilson, you can flip the score. There's definitely much more of a clutch factor in him than Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater combined. So I think that, it's reasonable to say that this team last year could have easily won 10 or 11 games. But again, so many variables in there that they could end up winning more. Could have applied more pressure to a team like the Baltimore Ravens who kind of ran away with it. Or the Pittsburgh Steelers who ended up having a close game there towards a little bit closer game than this game wasn't as close as the score really suggests. Philadelphia Eagles, that's another game. Maybe Philadelphia wasn't able to just run all over the defense and run the clock out. Had to be more passing because you have Russell Wilson there. So definitely hard to say for sure, but I think 10 or 11 games is definitely a possibility. Travis Weber came in with some more stars saying, thank you, Luke, for coming on. It was a great podcast. Thank you, Luke, for coming on and giving us fans your insight. Have a good night and have a great weekend. Broncos country, let's ride. And definitely, I mean, it's a holiday weekend. So everybody needs to make sure that they stay safe, don't drink and drive, and take care of yourselves. But got about a minute or two left on this before we actually have to fully wrap it up. And real quick, Chase Wallner says, not just to change the subject, but I was curious how Luc felt about trying Browning at edge. It's not the most popular move for some. Last time, I think you had a question about Baron Browning from Lance. Is it safe to assume that you haven't been able to really go in and look into it at all?
Yeah, truthfully, I haven't watched him really at all since then. I think when you make that move, and just to kind of briefly sum up what I said last time, I think you kind of make that move more or less for the rationale that you think he's a good enough athlete to do both, and you don't think that moving him to one stunts his development at the other. The other thing that I don't know if I necessarily said a lot last time about was kind of by moving him to that other position, you can give him a different picture and a different window on the defense, right? So now he gets more of a better sense of the overall structure of the defense because he's seen it from multiple angles. I think that can be helpful. Do I think that's a game changer? No, absolutely not. But I do think that can help a young guy at times. Now, the key there is, you don't want to do too much. You don't want to overwhelm him and overload him mentally. So I think there's a give and a take there for sure.
Yeah, and I think one thing too that's kind of goes unspoken with this is kind of going with back to that the more hats you can wear kind of thing. When it comes down to roster math to get into that final 53, having Baron Browning, who we've seen what he can do at off-ball linebacker, having him given his training at the NFL level to play the edge, it helps with the roster math. It gives them the versatility to play with the numbers between the edge and the off-ball linebacker position a little bit. Orange Colored Glasses comes in and says, I've only been watching the show for about a year, so this is the first time I've seen Luc. Thanks, Luc, for your knowledge. It's very enlightening. You rock. Yeah, I mean, I've said this before, and I mean, everybody loves it when you come on, Luc, and we appreciate it. Being able to come in and give a coach's perspective, a different perspective, and sometimes a conflicting opinion to what we have on here. Obviously, try not to make it an echo chamber, but that can be, difficult. And having you on definitely can help break that echo chamber. So we appreciate it.
I appreciate you guys. Keep having me back. Honestly, it's been a pleasure to keep showing up for these, and apparently you haven't managed to lose my number yet. So keep it coming.
See, that's the beneficial thing is I don't think I actually have your number in my phone, but I just Facebook so.
There are ways to fix that, Eric. Not to worry.
But we got to wrap it up here real quick. We got, of course, you can Valley do divers. I mean, we appreciate it. Normally Lance is here. He should be back next week. Unfortunately, no, all kidding. Lance is a great dude. I'm super happy for him. Hope he watches this because Lance, sincere congratulations for getting married, man. I hope you have a wonderful life with your soon-to-be wife. You can follow the Valley do divers pod on Twitter at DVDD_pod. Got it correctly this time. On first try. That's where you guys get all the information when it comes to the Dove Valley Deep Divers. You guys can also follow the mothership, the account, the one that we all descend from, or however you want to put it. At Mile High Huddle, it's where you guys get access to any kind of Mile High Huddle news, including the upcoming change on Saturday nights, where the Mile High Insiders, Nick and Luc, will be moving to Wednesday nights. I believe tomorrow is their final show on Saturday night, so make sure you guys tune into that and send them out with a bang. But you guys can, make sure you're following the Mile High Huddle account. It also gives you access to all of the written content that we put up. I'm currently doing my player profiles. I know Lance has been working on some film pieces. You get access to all of Luc's great content, all of, not Luc Polglaze, he doesn't write anymore, but Luke Patterson, Nick Kendall, all the breaking news from Chad and Zach coming down the pipeline. You guys can get access to that through the Mile High Huddle account. You guys can go huddleuppod.com to, the merch store. You guys can go get some awesome shirts like the Dove Valley Deep Diver shirt. You can get your Broncos for breakfast mug. I believe there's a onesie for babies. There's the other mugs, plenty of hats. All sorts of stuff. I don't have my Dove Valley Deep Divers hat in here at the moment, but you guys can also get that. Make sure you guys go to facebook.com/Mile High Huddle Pod and give a follow there. And go and to Apple Podcasts and leave the Huddle Up Pods a 5-star review for a chance to win some merchandise. And then, of course, if you guys aren't able to, but you guys have especially especially at the time with times going as being as difficult as they are, you guys can natural way to help the show is subscribing, liking, and sharing. Word of mouth is such a big way to help grow shows like this. I mean, just getting a positive review. That's why we ask you guys to go leave reviews. It helps the show a ton. Subscribing helps the show a ton, helps us get in front of more eyeballs, and helps us grow the show, as I said. So we appreciate all of your guys' support. We appreciate you guys tuning in, day out, week in, week out, consistently, and always asking the questions, leading to some wonderful football chats. But before we get out of here, Luke, any final words?
No, again, just thank you for the opportunity for me to come on. The more I come on, the more it feels like I like every single player I talk about. And again, I think that goes back into seeing things from a coach's perspective and saying, all right, what can we get out of this player? So always happy to be the naysayer in the room, even if I'm the one saying yay. So no, but seriously, thank you for the opportunity to come on. Appreciate it every time. And thanks for everyone for tuning in and asking some great questions.
Yeah, before you get busy, we'll have to try to get you on again. Maybe get you get it to where you can actually watch, some of the Rams and some of the stuff there, and maybe watch a little bit of the Broncos last year, so you can kind of speak about potential changes with the defensive scheme and stuff like that, and get a coach's perspective on that. Because honestly, right now, Nick, myself, all of us at MHH, we're just kind of grasping at straws at what we believe and what the projection is going to be, using what Ejiro Evero, Nathaniel Hackett, and the other coaching staff, what others on the coaching staff have said, to make an assumption about the defensive scheme. But guys, that's going to wrap it up for the Valley Deep Divers tonight. We will be back next week again with Lance. It's a holiday weekend, so as I said, stay safe. Don't drink and drive. Make sure you take care of yourselves. Make sure you protect those around you. And you know what? Nick always says, has his mantra at the end of spread kindness and everything like that. But sometimes people are struggling out there, and if you guys know anybody struggling, reach out. If you happen to be struggling yourself, mentally or whatever, I'm always here. My Twitters are open. It can be difficult to reach out, but it's always worth doing. So thank you guys, and have a wonderful night and a wonderful weekend.